The hum of the electric motor faded as Jamal Preston eased his obsidian Tesla into the designated CEO parking spot. 9:47 a.m., 2 minutes ahead of schedule. The cool, concrete stillness of the Stratwell Solutions underground parking garage offered a stark contrast to the flurry of activity he anticipated upstairs. He inhaled deeply, the faint scent of ozone mingling with the metallic tang of the garage. A new beginning, he thought, the words echoing not just in the cavernous space, but in the hollow chambers of his own ambition. His fingers lingered on the steering wheel, the smooth leather a tactile reminder of the road traveled, the sacrifices made to reach this pinnacle. He glanced at his reflection in the rearview mirror. Impeccably tailored suit, crisp white shirt, a power tie knotted with precision. The image reflected back was one of quiet strength, of unwavering resolve. He knew what some would see a young, black face in a space traditionally occupied by others. A flicker of something akin to defiance, or perhaps simply acceptance, crossed his features. Let them see, he thought, a quiet steel entering his voice, even in the silent confines of his car. Let them see what the future looks like. The click of his heels on the polished concrete floor resonated in the near-empty garage. He moved with an effortless grace, his briefcase swinging rhythmically by his side, each step a declaration of purpose. The elevator doors slid open with a soft whoosh, revealing a mirrored interior. He caught another glimpse of himself, this time superimposed over the faint reflection of the garage behind him. Two worlds converging, the old and the new. He pressed the button for the executive floor, the subtle vibration beneath his fingertips a palpable buzz of anticipation. As the elevator ascended, a strange mix of emotions churned within him. Excitement, tinged with a thread of apprehension. He'd spent years preparing for this moment, visualizing the weight of responsibility, the complexities of leadership. Yet, nothing could truly prepare him for the reality of stepping into the shoes of CEO, particularly in a company like Stratwell, with its deeply entrenched culture and preconceived notions. The elevator doors parted, revealing the hushed elegance of the executive floor. The plush carpeting swallowed the sound of his footsteps as he walked towards the sprawling glass doors of the main office. He could hear the muffled rhythm of keyboards, the low murmur of conversations. A familiar knot tightened in his stomach. This was it. No turning back. He pushed open the doors, the sudden influx of light and sound momentarily disorienting. The office was a hive of activity, a symphony of ringing phones and hushed discussions. Several heads turned towards him, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and something else. Surprise? Uncertainty? He met their gazes, his own expression carefully neutral, a faint smile playing on his lips. He walked toward the reception desk, his stride measured, confident. "Good morning," he addressed the receptionist, his voice calm and resonant. "Jamal Preston. I'm here to see—" He paused, letting the weight of his title hang in the air. "Myself." The receptionist, a young woman with wide, startled eyes, stammered, "Oh, of course, Mr. Preston. I wasn't expecting." Her voice trailed off, her gaze flitting nervously towards the elevators, as if expecting someone else, someone who perhaps looked more the part, to emerge. Before Jamal could respond, a gruff voice cut through the air. "You lost, son." Jamal turned to see a man, presumably in his late 50s, approaching him, a look of bewildered annoyance etched on his face. He wore a faded Stratwell Facilities uniform, a name tag identifying him as Rick Donnelly. He held a toolbox in one hand, a wrench dangling precariously from his pocket. He squinted at Jamal, his gaze lingering on his expensive suit, his polished shoes. A wave of weariness washed over Jamal. He recognized the look. He'd seen it countless times before. The veiled suspicion, the unspoken assumptions. He took a deep breath, reminding himself to remain composed. "I'm not lost," Jamal replied, his voice even. "I'm Jamal Preston, the new CEO." Rick blinked, his expression shifting from annoyance to outright disbelief. "CEO," he scoffed, a dismissive wave of his hand. "Now, that's a good one. The CEO's supposed to be—" he trailed off, his eyes darting towards the elevators again, as if expecting the real So to magically appear. He looked back at Jamal, a condescending smirk twisting his lips. "You sure you got the right place, kid?" Jamal's internal monologue churned. "Kid? Really?" A flicker of irritation flared within him, but he quickly suppressed it. This was not the time for a power play. This was an opportunity to dismantle these ingrained prejudices brick by brick. He met Rick's gaze, his expression unwavering. "Quite sure," he replied, his voice calm, almost gentle. "Perhaps you could direct me to the boardroom? I have a meeting with the executive team in precisely 15 minutes. Rick stared at him, his face a mask of confusion. The wrench slipped from his pocket and clattered onto the floor, the metallic clang echoing in the sudden silence that had descended upon the reception area. He bent down to retrieve it, his movements stiff, almost robotic. He straightened up, his eyes meeting Jamal's. Something in Jamal's unwavering gaze, in the quiet confidence that radiated from him, seemed to finally penetrate the thick fog of his preconceptions. The tension in the air crackled. Heads turned. Whispers rippled through the office. Danielle Cruz, head of strategic operations, emerged from her office, her brow furrowed in concern. "Is everything all right, Rick?" Rick, still visibly flustered, stammered. This gentleman claims to be," before he could finish. A voice, clear and authoritative, resonated from the hallway leading to the executive offices. Jamal. Charles, the former CEO and now chairman of the board, strode towards them, a look of genuine warmth spreading across his face. He extended his hand towards Jamal. "Welcome aboard, Jamal. So glad you could make it." The atmosphere in the reception area shifted palpably. The whispers died down, replaced by a hushed expectancy. Rick stared at the scene unfolding before him, his face a mixture of bewilderment and dawning realization. He looked from Charles to Jamal, his eyes wide with a slowly dawning understanding. Denise, the HR director, joined them. "Welcome, Mr. Preston. We're all excited to start this new chapter with you." She gave Rick a pointed look, her expression a subtle blend of reprimand and encouragement. "Rick, I believe Mr. Preston mentioned he has a meeting. Perhaps you could help him find the boardroom?" Rick swallowed hard, his face flushing slightly. Of course, Mr. Preston. Right this way." He gestured towards the hallway, his movements now hesitant, almost deferential. As Jamal followed Rick towards the boardroom, he couldn't help but feel a surge of something. Not quite triumph, but perhaps a quiet satisfaction. The first battle had been won, not through force or aggression, but through quiet resilience, through the unwavering assertion of his own presence. He knew the road ahead would be long, filled with similar challenges, with the need to constantly dismantle preconceived notions and reshape the very fabric of Stratwell's culture. But as he entered the boardroom, the morning sun streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows, he felt a surge of resolve. This is just the beginning, he thought, his gaze sweeping over the expectant faces of the executive team. The real work starts now. The sleek, polished granite of the lobby floor reflected the intricate patterns of the recessed lighting above. Jamal Preston adjusted his suit jacket, the subtle weight of the fabric of familiar comfort. He inhaled, the faint scent of lemon-infused cleaning solution mingling with the subtler aroma of fresh coffee emanating from the cafe, tucked discreetly to the left. His heart beat with a steady rhythm, a counterpoint to the nervous flutter in his stomach. This was it. Day one. He was here to take the reins, to steer Stratwell Solutions into a future he believed in, a future that felt both exhilarating and daunting. A figure detached itself from the bustling activity near the elevators, a man with thinning gray hair and a slightly stooped posture, clad in a worn facilities uniform. He approached Jamal, his expression a mixture of curiosity and mild annoyance. Rick Donnelly, the facilities manager, had seen it all in his 20-odd years at Stratwell. CEOs, consultants, vendors, they all blurred into a single homogeneous stream of faces. This new one, though, something was different. He couldn't quite put his finger on it, but a vague unease settled in his gut. Maybe it was the way the man held himself, a quiet confidence that seemed at odds with the delivery boxes he was surely here to drop off. "You lost or something?" Rick asked, his voice gruff but not unkind. He pointed towards a side entrance. "Deliveries go through the loading dock around back." Jamal paused, a flicker of something unreadable crossing his face. He'd anticipated resistance, expected the whispers and sideways glances. But this was almost comical. The assumption, so casually delivered, so deeply ingrained. He considered correcting the man immediately, asserting his authority, but a different instinct took hold. He wanted to observe, to understand the undercurrents of this place before making waves. "I'm here for the 10 a.m. meeting. Conference room B." He kept his tone even, neutral, letting the words hang in the air. Rick squinted, his brow furrowing slightly. "Meeting? This guy?" Conference room B was reserved for executive meetings. This kid looked barely old enough to shave. He opened his mouth to retort, to reiterate the company policy on deliveries, when a voice cut through the lobby's muted hum. "There you are, Mr. Preston. We've been waiting upstairs." A woman, impeccably dressed in a tailored pantsuit, strode towards them, her heels clicking against the polished floor. Her smile was warm, professional. She extended a hand towards Jamal. "Danielle Cruz, head of strategic operations. So glad you could make it." Rick watched, dumbfounded, as the newcomer Mr. Preston shook Danielle's hand. His mind struggled to reconcile the image of the delivery man with the deference Danielle was displaying. The realization hit him like a physical blow. He had judged a book by its cover, and in doing so, had revealed a prejudice he hadn't even known he possessed. Shame, hot and prickly, spread through him. He stammered, "Oh, I'm sorry, sir. I didn't." Jamal's gaze met Rick's, a flicker of understanding, perhaps even a hint of compassion, in his eyes. "No problem," he said, his voice still calm, unruffled. "It's my first day." He turned back to Danielle, a subtle shift in his posture, a newfound authority settling upon him. "Shall we?" As they ascended the escalator, the rhythmic whir of the machinery a backdrop to his thoughts, Jamal reflected on the encounter. It was a microcosm of the challenge ahead. He hadn't just acquired a company. He'd inherited a culture, a system of unspoken assumptions and biases that ran deeper than any balance sheet. He knew that changing it wouldn't be easy, wouldn't be swift, but it was necessary. The conference room was a stark contrast to the bustling lobby. Sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the polished mahogany table and the expectant faces of the assembled executives. Charles, the former CFO and interim CEO, sat at the head of the table, his expression a mixture of forced cordiality and thinly veiled skepticism. The others mirrored his unease, their gazes flitting towards Jamal with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. Introductions were made, hands shaken. The air crackled with unspoken questions, with the weight of expectations. Jamal took his place at the head of the table, the sunlight catching the subtle glint of his watch. He felt their eyes on him, assessing, judging. He didn't flinch. "Good morning," he began, his voice resonating with a quiet authority. "I'm sure many of you have questions, concerns, and I welcome them. But before we delve into the specifics of our strategy, I want to address something more fundamental." He paused, letting his gaze sweep across the room, meeting each pair of eyes in turn. Perception, assumption, bias. The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Denise, the HR director, leaned forward, her expression thoughtful. This was a new direction, a surprising departure from the usual financial jargon. She felt a flicker of anticipation, a sense that something significant was about to unfold. Jamal continued, "This morning, I was mistaken for a delivery driver." A ripple of surprise went through the room. Charles coughed awkwardly. "It was an honest mistake," Jamal clarified, but it highlighted something crucial. We all carry biases, conscious or unconscious. They shape how we see the world, how we interact with each other, and ultimately, how we conduct business. He looked directly at Charles. "We live in a world where talent and potential don't always come packaged in the way we expect. If we limit ourselves to those expectations, we limit our potential for growth, for innovation, for true success. Danielle nodded, her gaze fixed on Jamal. His words resonated deeply with her own experiences, with the subtle yet pervasive barriers she'd encountered throughout her career. This wasn't just corporate rhetoric. It felt genuine, heartfelt. The meeting continued, the initial skepticism gradually giving way to a grudging respect, then to something akin to admiration. Jamal spoke not just of numbers and strategies, but of values, of creating a culture of inclusivity and empowerment. He painted a vision of a company where everyone, regardless of background or appearance, had the opportunity to contribute, to excel. He spoke of breaking down barriers, not just in the marketplace, but within the very walls of Stratwell Solutions itself. As the meeting concluded, a palpable shift had occurred in the room. The air of apprehension had dissipated, replaced by a sense of cautious optimism, a flicker of hope. The old guard, represented by Charles and the other senior executives, looked at Jamal with new eyes. They saw not just a young CEO, but a leader, a visionary, someone who could potentially guide them and the company toward a future they hadn't even dared to imagine. The transformation had begun, subtly, powerfully, in the quiet confidence of a man who refused to be defined by anyone's assumptions. The brushed steel doors slid shut, sealing Jamal into the confined space of the elevator. The faint hum of its ascent was a low, persistent thrum against the silence, punctuated only by the soft click of the floor indicator lights as they illuminated one by one. 18 floors. 18 floors to begin dismantling the calcified layers of prejudice that had settled like dust over Stratwell Solutions. He adjusted the weight of his briefcase slightly, the smooth leather a comforting presence against his palm. The reflection staring back at him was a stranger, a CEO in a meticulously tailored suit, his expression carefully neutral. Beneath the surface, however, a current of anticipation, a mixture of apprehension and resolve, thrummed with the same quiet energy as the elevator's motor. Another set of doors opened, and a man stepped in, his presence filling the small space with a sudden, almost palpable density. Rick Donnelly, the facilities manager. Jamal recognized him from the brief introductions earlier that morning. Donnelly's gaze flickered over Jamal, a brief, almost dismissive sweep before settling on the illuminated numbers above the door. His shoulders slumped slightly, the posture of a man accustomed to the weight of routine. Jamal felt a flicker of something cold and unsettling in his stomach. This was it, the first subtle tremor of the resistance he expected. He braced himself, his senses heightened, attuned to every nuance of the man's body language, every unspoken syllable hanging in the air between them. The silence stretched, taut as a wire, amplified by the confined space. The rhythmic hum of the elevator became a subtle pressure, a physical manifestation of the unspoken tension. Donnelly shifted his weight, the faint creak of his shoes against the polished floor echoing in the quiet. He cleared his throat, a small, almost apologetic sound. "Going up?" he asked, the words flat, devoid of any real inflection. 18th floor, Jamal replied, his voice steady, even. He kept his gaze fixed on the ascending numbers, willing himself to remain impassive, to project an aura of calm authority. Inside, however, a complex tapestry of thoughts and emotions unfurled. Was this casual dismissal deliberate? Or was it simply the ingrained habit of a man accustomed to overlooking those he deemed insignificant? "Big meeting?" Donnelly ventured, his eyes still fixed on the floor indicator. "Something like that," Jamal responded, a subtle tightening around his lips. He felt a surge of irritation, a prickle of resentment at being treated as an outsider in his own company. He fought it down, reminding himself that change wouldn't happen overnight. This was just the beginning. The elevator slowed, the soft chime announcing their arrival on the 14th floor. The doors slid open, revealing a glimpse of bustling activity, a blur of faces and hurried footsteps. No one entered. The doors closed once more, resuming their silent ascent. Donnelly shifted again, his discomfort palpable. He glanced at Jamal, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. "Didn't realize you were the CEO," he mumbled, the words barely audible above the hum of the elevator. Jamal turned, his gaze meeting Donnelly's directly. The silence that followed was heavy, pregnant with meaning. "You didn't ask," he replied, his voice soft, yet laced with steel. Donnelly's face flushed a dull red, a visible wave of embarrassment washing over him. He stammered, "It's just we get all kinds of people walking through. You can't be too careful these days." The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken assumptions, with the weight of ingrained prejudice. Jamal felt a surge of anger, a hot, visceral reaction that threatened to shatter his carefully constructed composure. He took a slow, deliberate breath, forcing himself to remain calm. This was precisely the kind of unconscious bias he was here to dismantle. He saw in Donnelly's eyes not malice, but the ingrained reflex of a lifetime spent within a system that privileged certain appearances, certain demographics. He represented the status quo, a status quo Jamal intended to shatter. "Careful," Jamal echoed, his voice low, laced with a quiet intensity that made Donnelly flinch. "Indeed, Mr. Donnelly. Being careful about the assumptions we make, about the judgments we form based on appearances, is paramount. Wouldn't you agree?" He paused, allowing his words to hang in the air, to penetrate the thick silence. The elevator doors whispered open, revealing the hushed expanse of Stratwell Solutions' 18th floor. A low hum of hushed conversation, punctuated by the staccato click of heels on polished marble, filled the air. Jamal Preston stepped out, the faint scent of sandalwood clinging to his crisp suit. He paused for a fraction of a second, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes, a mix of anticipation and the quiet steel of resolve. He adjusted his cufflinks, a small, almost unconscious gesture that belied the churning tension beneath his composed facade. "This is it," he thought, the words echoing in the cavernous space of his mind. "This is where it begins." The executive team, assembled outside Conference Room B, turned as one. Their faces, a tableau of barely concealed surprise, mirrored the unspoken question hanging in the air. Charles, his silver hair gleaming under the fluorescent lights, blinked. Danielle Cruz, head of strategic operations, tilted her head slightly, her expression thoughtful. Denise, the HR director, offered a small, cautious smile. A ripple of murmurs, like wind rustling through dry leaves, passed through the group. Jamal met their gazes, his own expression unreadable. He knew what they saw, a man younger than they expected, a face that didn't fit their preconceived notions of what a CEO should look like. "Let them stare," a voice whispered in the back of his mind. "Their surprise is their weakness." "Good morning," Jamal's voice, smooth and resonant, cut through the hushed expectancy. He didn't wait for a response, instead turning towards the conference room doors. Charles, recovering his composure, gestured towards the open door. "Please, Mr. Preston. We were just about to—" He trailed off, searching for the right words, the carefully crafted agenda suddenly feeling inadequate. Inside, the room was cool and sterile, the long mahogany table gleaming under the recessed lighting. Jamal took his place at the head, the weight of the chair a tangible reminder of the responsibility he now carried. He looked around the table, his gaze lingering on each face. He saw the skepticism, the veiled curiosity, the unspoken doubts. "They're waiting for me to fail," he thought, a flicker of grim satisfaction twisting his lips. "They won't have to wait long if they continue to underestimate me." He began to speak, his voice low and measured, each word carefully chosen. "I didn't come here for pleasantries. I didn't come here to reassure you. I came here to lead." His gaze sharpened, pinning each executive in place. "And I came to clean up what should have been fixed 5 years ago." Silence descended, thick and heavy. Charles shifted in his seat, his carefully cultivated calm momentarily shaken. Danielle's eyes, however, held a spark of intrigue. Denise, ever perceptive, leaned forward, her expression thoughtful. The air crackled with unspoken tension, the unspoken questions hanging heavy in the room. They don't understand yet, Jamal thought, a wave of weariness washing over him. But they will. A sudden intrusion broke the spell. A man, his face flushed, his hair disheveled, hurried into the room. "Mr. Preston," he said, his voice breathless. There's a problem with his words died in his throat as he finally took in the scene the assembled executives, the tension in the air, and the young man sitting at the head of the table, an aura of quiet authority radiating from him. Rick Donnelly, the facilities manager, felt a cold dread creep up his spine. He'd been so focused on the malfunctioning air conditioning unit, so intent on relaying the urgent news to Well, he wasn't quite sure who he expected to find at the head of that table. Certainly not this kid. He stammered, his mind scrambling for an explanation, for a way to salvage the situation. He had envisioned a different scenario entirely, one where he, a veteran of Stratwell, would be offering guidance, not stammering apologies. The carefully rehearsed words of complaint about the faulty system withered on his tongue. This wasn't the CEO he'd imagined reporting to. This wasn't anyone he'd imagined reporting to. Charles, his face a mask of controlled annoyance, intervened. "Rick," he said, his voice clipped, "we're good in here." Rick flushed crimson. He mumbled an apology, backing out of the room, his mind reeling. He felt a burning shame, a sense of disorientation. Who was that? He thought, the question echoing in his mind. The air conditioning issue, once so urgent, now seemed trivial. The encounter, brief as it was, had left him shaken, the unspoken assumptions of years suddenly crumbling around him. He walked back down the hallway, the polished marble floor suddenly seeming unsteady beneath his feet. The casual dismissal, the barely concealed surprise on the executives' faces, the quiet authority of the young man at the head of the table, it all coalesced into a disquieting realization. Things were changing at Stratwell Solutions, and he wasn't sure he was ready. Back in the conference room, Jamal watched Rick's retreating figure, his expression unreadable. He knew exactly what assumptions Rick had made, what biases had led to that awkward intrusion. He'd seen it countless times before. He had felt the sting of those assumptions himself. He's a microcosm of the problem, Jamal thought, his gaze sweeping over the assembled executives. A symptom of a deeper malaise. "Where were we?" he said, his voice regaining its steely edge. The executives shifted in their seats, their expressions now tinged with a newfound respect, a grudging acknowledgement of the power shift that had just taken place. The initial surprise had given way to a wary curiosity, a dawning understanding that this new CEO was not to be underestimated. The game, they realized, had changed, and they were just beginning to understand the rules. The air in Conference Room B was thick with anticipation, a palpable tension clinging to the polished mahogany table and the faces of Stratwell Solutions senior leadership. Jamal Preston, his presence still a novelty in the room, stood at the head of the table, a projector casting the cold, hard numbers of the company's recent performance onto the wall behind him. He could feel their gazes, a mixture of curiosity and skepticism, burning into him. He knew what they saw: a young, black CEO in a space they hadn't envisioned anyone like him occupying. "They're waiting for me to stumble," he thought, a wry smile playing on his lips. "Let's give them something to watch." His voice, calm and measured, cut through the silence. "These figures," he began, his finger tracing the downward slope of the revenue graph, "paint a clear picture. We're not just stagnant, we're bleeding." He paused, letting the gravity of the statement sink in. He noticed Charles, the CFO, shifting uncomfortably in his seat, his lips pressed into a thin line. Danielle Cruz, head of strategic operations, however, met his gaze with a steady, almost challenging look. He respected that. He continued, his words carefully chosen, each syllable a calculated move in a high-stakes game. "This isn't just about the numbers. It's about the culture that created them. A culture of complacency, of silos, and frankly," he paused again, his gaze sweeping across the room, "a culture that hasn't embraced meritocracy in its truest sense." He saw a flicker of something resentment, Disbelief? In the eyes of a few executives. Good, he thought. Let them feel it. The silence stretched, punctuated only by the hum of the projector. He could almost taste the unspoken questions hanging in the air. Who is this guy to tell us how to run things? Their expressions seemed to scream. He didn't flinch. He knew this was just the beginning. He'd anticipated this resistance. He'd studied the company's dynamics for months leading up to the acquisition, dissecting not just its financials, but its very soul. He knew the unspoken rules, the ingrained biases, the subtle ways in which talent was overlooked and potential stifled. We're going to finish this meeting, and by the end of the week, his voice resonated with newfound authority. I expect every department head to give me a straight report. No sugar, no fluff, just truth. A sudden creak of the door broke the tense silence. All eyes turned to see Rick Donnelly, the facilities manager, standing awkwardly in the doorway, his face flushed. Jamal recognized him, the man from the hallway earlier, the one who dismissed him with a dismissive wave. A ripple of annoyance coursed through him, but he quickly suppressed it. This, he realized, was an opportunity. "Rick," he said, his voice even, "is there something you need?" Rick shuffled his feet, avoiding eye contact with anyone in the room. Yeah, he stammered, holding a crumpled piece of paper. "This just came from Mr. He looked at Jamal, a flicker of recognition, then embarrassment crossing his features. "Mr. Preston." Jamal took the paper, his mind racing. This interruption, this awkward moment, was a microcosm of the very issues he was addressing. The assumption that he couldn't possibly be the CEO, the casual disregard, the subtle disrespect. He glanced at the paper, a delivery confirmation. Insignificant in itself, yet profoundly symbolic. He looked up at Rick, a strange mix of emotions swirling within him. Anger, yes, but also a flicker of something else. Pity, perhaps, or maybe just a weary understanding. He knew Rick wasn't inherently malicious. He was simply a product of an environment that had allowed such biases to flourish. He addressed the room, his voice still calm, yet carrying a new weight. "This," he said, holding up the paper, "is a perfect illustration of what we're talking about. Assumptions, preconceived notions. We make them every day, often without realizing it. And sometimes," he looked directly at Rick, "those assumptions prevent us from seeing the truth." The room was silent. Rick's face was a mask of conflicting emotions. Shame, regret, perhaps a dawning realization. "Mr. Preston," Rick started, his voice barely above a whisper. He cleared his throat. I misjudged you earlier. Not just you. I think I've been working here too long, assuming certain things, because that's how it's always been." His words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. The other executives shifted in their seats, some avoiding eye contact, others staring at Rick with a mixture of surprise and something akin to respect. Jamal looked at Rick, a genuine, albeit cautious, smile forming on his lips. He saw a flicker of hope in Rick's eyes, a spark of understanding that transcended apologies. This, he knew, was a turning point, not just for Rick, but for the entire company. The air in the room, once thick with tension, now held a fragile promise of change. The battle had just begun, but Jamal knew, with a certainty that settled deep within him, that they were finally on the right path. He nodded to Rick, a silent acknowledgement of his apology, and turned back to the group. The meeting, he sensed, was about to take a very different turn. The low hum of the air conditioning unit was the only sound in Conference Room B, a stark contrast to the earlier boisterous all-hands meeting. Sunlight slanted through the blinds, cutting across the polished mahogany table, reflecting off the expectant faces of Stratwell's department heads. Jamal sat at the head, the weight of the room, the weight of their gazes, a palpable presence. He could feel the residue of the morning's tension, a lingering skepticism that clung to the air like static. He took a breath, the faint scent of lemon polish tickling his nostrils. This is where the real work begins, he thought, the thought a quiet echo in the vastness of his mind. He knew pronouncements and grand gestures in the auditorium were one thing, but true transformation happened in the smaller, more intimate spaces where vulnerability could take root. He met Danielle Cruz's gaze across the table. Her expression was thoughtful, a flicker of something he couldn't quite decipher in her dark eyes. Support? Curiosity? He shifted his focus to Rick Donnelly, the facilities manager, the man whose initial dismissal had been so stark, so revealing of the very issues Jamal aimed to address. Rick's gaze was fixed on the tabletop, his fingers tracing the wood grain, a stark contrast to the rigid posture he'd held earlier. He's processing, Jamal thought, a sliver of hope threading through his apprehension. This morning, Jamal began, his voice quiet yet resonant. We talked about change, about building a more inclusive Stratwell. But those words, they're just words. Hollow unless we fill them with meaning, with action. He paused, letting the silence stretch, a tangible bridge between them. I want to share something personal with you all, something that has shaped not just my leadership style, but who I am at my core. He saw a subtle shift in their postures, a collective leaning in, a quiet attentiveness that was more valuable than any applause. He closed his eyes for a moment, the image of his younger self, a lanky teenager navigating the hallways of a predominantly white high school, surfacing in his mind's eye. He could almost feel the sting of isolation, the weight of constantly having to prove himself. I grew up in a small town, he began, his voice tinged with a quiet vulnerability. A town where I was often the only person of color in the room. And that experience, it stays with you. It becomes a lens through which you see the world. He opened his eyes, meeting their gazes, each one a mirror reflecting his own vulnerability. I was constantly questioned, he continued, the memory a dull ache in his chest. Questioned about my abilities, my intelligence, my right to be there. Even when I excelled, there was always this underlying doubt. Like I had to constantly prove I wasn't an exception, but the rule. Denise, the HR director, leaned forward, her expression mirroring the empathy he was trying to convey. That's a heavy burden to carry, she murmured, her voice laced with genuine understanding. Jamal nodded, a small, tight movement. It is, he agreed, and I need you to understand what that does to people. When you're constantly asked to prove that you belong, even after you've already done the work, that changes how you move. It changes how you speak. It changes how you see yourself. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. He could see a flicker of recognition in Charles's eyes, a subtle tightening of his jaw. He understands, Jamal thought, at least on some level. This isn't just about me, he continued, his voice gaining strength. This is about every person who has ever felt marginalized, overlooked, dismissed. It's about creating a culture where everyone feels seen, heard, and valued for who they are, not for who they're assumed to be. He directed his gaze to Rick. Mr. Donnelly, he said, his voice steady. This morning, you made an assumption about me based on my appearance. And I understand, on an intellectual level, that these biases are often unconscious. But understanding isn't enough. We need to actively challenge them, dismantle them, within ourselves and within this company. Rick's gaze finally met Jamal's, a complex mix of emotions swirling in his eyes, shame, regret, perhaps even a glimmer of understanding. He began, his voice hesitant. I judged a man I didn't know. Judged him based on nothing real. Just what I expected to see. The silence that followed was different this time. Not the tense, expectant silence of before, but a silence pregnant with reflection. Danielle spoke, her voice soft yet firm. We all have biases, conscious or unconscious. The key is acknowledging them and actively working to overcome them. Charles nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. This requires a shift in perspective, a shift in how we operate, how we interact with each other. A murmur of agreement rippled through the room, a fragile consensus forming, a seed of change taking root. Jamal felt a surge of hope, a cautious optimism blossoming within him. He knew this was just the beginning, the first step on a long and arduous journey. But in this room, in this moment, he saw a glimmer of the future he envisioned, a future where everyone had the opportunity to thrive, to reach their full potential, without the burden of prejudice and preconceived notions holding them back. He knew the road ahead would be challenging, filled with resistance and setbacks. But the weight of the room, the weight of their gazes, now felt different, lighter, infused with a shared purpose, a shared commitment to building a better Stratwell, a better future. The glass doors of Stratwell Solutions shimmered, reflecting the cityscape's fading light. Jamal Preston stood on the sidewalk, the cool evening air a stark contrast to the heated exchanges of the day. He drew a deep breath, the crispness a momentary balm to the tension that still hummed beneath his skin. First day, CEO. The words echoed in his mind, each syllable a weight, a responsibility. He glanced back at the building, a monolith of steel and glass, and a faint, almost bitter smile touched his lips. This wasn't how he'd imagined it. Not the building, not the title, not the fight. He'd envisioned triumph, a sense of arrival. Instead, he felt weary, a weariness that settled deep in his bones, a familiar ache born of battles fought and won, only to find another waiting just around the corner. He remembered the cramped apartment he'd grown up in, the hand-me-down clothes, the constant struggle to be seen, to be heard, to simply be. He remembered the sting of dismissive glances, the subtle snubs, the constant pressure to prove himself twice as good to get half the recognition. The memories weren't a source of bitterness. Not anymore. They were a reminder, a scar that had long since healed but left an indelible mark, shaping him, driving him. He'd climbed a mountain, clawing his way up, pushing against the invisible barriers of prejudice and assumption. And now, standing here at the summit, the view was different. He could see the landscape stretched out before him, the intricate web of power and privilege, the deep-rooted inequalities that still scarred the terrain. A car pulled up, its headlights momentarily blinding. Charles, the CFO, rolled down the window. "Need a ride, Jamal?" There was a newfound respect in his voice, a subtle shift from the hesitant curiosity of earlier. "Thanks, but I'll walk," Jamal replied, his voice calm, even though a wave of exhaustion threatened to engulf him. Charles nodded, his gaze lingering for a moment before he drove off. Jamal watched the taillights disappear into the evening traffic, his thoughts swirling. Charles's initial surprise, the barely concealed skepticism in the eyes of the other executives, it was all a reflection of the same underlying issue. They hadn't seen him. They'd seen a stereotype, a preconceived notion that didn't fit their image of CEO. He'd shattered that image, piece by piece, with every insightful comment, every decisive action, every quiet display of unwavering competence. He had forced them to see beyond the surface, to confront their own biases. He started walking, the rhythmic tap of his shoes against the pavement a steady counterpoint to the chaotic symphony of the city. Danielle had been different. She'd seen beyond the surface from the start, extending a hand, offering genuine support. Her words from earlier resonated in his mind. "We need you here, Jamal. Your perspective, your experience, it's invaluable." He realized that change wouldn't come from the top down alone. It required allies, individuals within the system willing to challenge the status quo. A flicker of movement caught his eye. Rick Donnelly, the facilities manager, was locking up for the night. He seemed to hesitate as he saw Jamal, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. Then, he gave a curt nod and walked away, disappearing around the corner. Jamal closed his eyes for a moment. The image of Rick's averted gaze, a sharp reminder of the day's earlier confrontation. The casual dismissal, the thinly veiled disrespect, it had been a stark reminder of how much work still needed to be done. He'd addressed it calmly, firmly, not allowing anger to cloud his judgment. "This isn't about being politically correct," he'd said, his voice resonating with quiet authority. "This is about being humanly correct." He'd seen a flicker of understanding in Rick's eyes, a subtle shift in his demeanor. It wasn't a victory, not yet, but it was a crack in the wall, a glimmer of hope. He continued walking, the city lights blurring around him. The weight of the day pressed down on him, but beneath it, a different sensation stirred, a quiet sense of purpose. He wasn't just leading a company, he was changing a culture. It wasn't just about profits and losses, it was about people. It was about creating a space where everyone, regardless of their background, their appearance, their perceived place, could thrive. Later, much later, he heard Denise, the HR director, reflecting that inclusivity is about belonging and connection. She knew change did not happen overnight. It happened in the everyday interactions, in the quiet choices, in the conscious decisions to see, to hear, to value every individual. Her insightful additions contributed to the shift of perspective that needed to be made within the company. He thought back to Charles's question as they'd left the office. You ever get tired of having to prove it? He hadn't answered then. But now, walking beneath the vast indifference of the night sky, the answer came to him, clear and unwavering. You want the truth? Always. I stopped expecting not to. He didn't say it out loud. He didn't need to. The words echoed in the silence, a testament to his journey, a promise for the future. He knew the fight was far from over. But tonight, beneath the cold, indifferent gaze of the city lights, he felt a flicker of warmth, a flicker of hope, and that, he realized, was enough. For now.